The last time John looked into Axel's eyes, there was no fear, no pain, only the quiet understanding that they had fought their final battle together. But as the world around him shattered, he realized the hardest fight wasn't against enemies, but against the emptiness left behind by the one companion who had never failed him. And in the silence of that loss, the bond they shared would echo forever. The wind whispered through the narrow valley, carrying with it the faint scent of dust and burnt metal. Lieutenant John Harris trudged along the rugged path, his boots crunching against the dry, cracked earth beneath him. The weight of his gear pressed heavily on his shoulders, a constant reminder of the war that had kept him far from home for too long. The soft hum of helicopters above and the distant, muted sound of gunfire were ever present, but they didn't bother him anymore. They were background noise, a constant symphony of violence that had long ago become part of the landscape. It was another routine patrol, just like every other day in Afghanistan, and yet something felt off. There was an unease in the air, a shift that John couldn't put his finger on. The wind had a chill to it, as if the very earth itself was holding its breath. The landscape, barren and unforgiving, stretched out before him in endless stretches of brown, dotted with rocks and sparse vegetation. The silence between the sounds of battle seemed louder than usual, almost like the world was waiting for something. John adjusted the weight of his rifle, the stock digging into his chest as he moved forward. His mind wandered, as it often did during these endless patrols. He thought about home, about the days before he had been sent to this place, before the war had stripped him of everything he had known. Back then, he had been an eager young officer, full of ideals and a desire to make a difference. Now, after months of dust and death, he was just trying to make it through the next day. The war had a way of draining you, of taking everything and leaving you with nothing but the sound of your own thoughts. A rustling in the bush to his left broke his reverie, snapping him back to the present. His hand instinctively went to his sidearm, the motion as automatic as breathing. He had learned long ago to never underestimate the possibility of danger in this country. But then, as his eyes scanned the shadows, he saw the source of the movement, a dog. It wasn't the shape he expected, though. Not the usual feral creatures that roamed the war-torn landscape, scavenging for scraps. This dog was different. It was a German shepherd, strong and sleek, its coat dark as the night, blending almost seamlessly into the shadows. The animal's eyes locked with John's, and for a moment there was nothing but stillness between them. John froze. The air felt heavier, as if the world had momentarily paused. The dog stood there, its body tense but not threatening. Its eyes were deep, golden brown, and steady, almost as though it could see through him. In those eyes, John saw a quiet intelligence, a calmness he couldn't quite explain. It was the look of an animal who had seen things, who had experienced the same horrors as the men it fought beside. For a brief moment, it seemed that time itself had stopped. The wind stilled, the noise of the helicopters faded, and the distant gunfire became a dull hum in the background. There was only the dog. And then there was John. No words were spoken, but in the silence between them, something passed. A connection, a recognition of sorts. John wasn't the type of man who believed in the sentimental bonds people often spoke of with animals. He had always kept his distance, preferring the company of his fellow soldiers to anything else. He'd seen too much during his time in the service to let emotions cloud his judgment. To him, a dog was just a tool, a means to an end. They were trained to detect bombs, to help search for enemies, to assist in ways that humans couldn't. A dog's loyalty was based on training. Not affection, but there was something about this dog. Something different. The German shepherd's ears perked up slightly, as though it was waiting for something waiting for him. Slowly, John lowered his hand from his sidearm, a quiet surrender that surprised even him. The dog stepped forward, its body fluid and graceful, the kind of movement that told John it had been trained well. But there was also something softer in the way it approached. It wasn't the cautious gait of a war dog ready to pounce at a moment's notice. This dog moved with purpose, but there was a gentleness about it. John swallowed hard. "You lost, boy?" he muttered under his breath. though he knew the dog wouldn't answer. The dog paused a few feet away from him, its golden eyes still fixed on his face. Then, as if deciding it had seen enough, it sat down, its tail brushing against the dirt in a slow, steady rhythm. The silence stretched between them again, and for the first time in a long while, John felt something stir deep inside him. "Axel," a voice came from behind him, breaking the stillness. A man in full military gear approached cautiously, his face worn and tired. He was a member of a different unit, someone John didn't recognize. "His name's Axel." The man continued, noticing John's gaze. "He's part of the K9 team. My handler got reassigned, so Axel's, he's a bit of an orphan now." John nodded slowly. "How long has he been out here?" "Couple of days now." "He's supposed to be working with one of the teams." "BUT, we've had some movement issues. I guess he's found his new partner." John looked back at the dog, its eyes still steady on him as though it had already chosen him. The thought crossed his mind. Fleeting but undeniable. Maybe he's been waiting for me. The handler shifted his weight uneasily, his eyes flicking between John and the dog. "You're supposed to pair up with him now. Standard procedure." "We don't have much choice, so if you want to take him out on your next patrol, he's yours." John studied Axel for a long moment. The dog didn't move, didn't whine or bark. It simply sat there, its eyes never leaving him, waiting for John to make a decision. John couldn't quite explain it, but something about the moment felt ... important. This wasn't just another assignment, another task to complete. It was as though this dog had found him for a reason, as though their paths had been set to cross in this very moment. "You're quiet, aren't you?" John murmured, kneeling down slowly, feeling the weight of his decision settle in his chest. He wasn't sure what he was doing, but he knew that he wasn't going to send the dog away. "All right, Axel," he said, his voice steady despite the unease in his gut. "You're with me now?" The dog's tail gave a slow, tentative wag, a simple gesture that sent an unexpected surge of warmth through John's chest. It wasn't much, just a slight twitch of the dog's tail, but in that small, quiet movement, a bond began to form. The kind of bond that would grow stronger with every step they took together. John rose to his feet and gestured for Axel to follow. Without hesitation, the dog stood and walked beside him, its movements calm but alert, as if ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The valley stretched out before them, vast and unforgiving. But for the first time in a long while, John didn't feel quite so alone. The days blurred together after that first meeting. Patrols, checkpoints, gunfire, and the constant tension in the air, it all became a seamless backdrop to the bond that was quietly growing between Lieutenant John Harris and his new partner, Axel. The dog had settled into his role with a kind of effortless grace, moving through the terrain with the quiet precision of a seasoned soldier. He was more than just a tool for detection. Axel was becoming something else, something John couldn't quite articulate. A companion, perhaps. A protector, certainly. It wasn't long before John realized that Axel had an uncanny ability to sense danger. The dog's instincts were sharp, but not in the way John had expected. It wasn't just about finding bombs or sniffing out hidden explosives. No, Axel had a deeper understanding of the world around him, as if the dog could feel the tension in the air before it erupted. Time and time again, Axel would pause, ears perked, his body suddenly alert, and John would stop too. Sensing something in the dog's reaction, a quiet warning that something wasn't right. On their second patrol together, they were nearing a small village tucked away behind the jagged hills. John had been through this village before, but something was different today. The village seemed too quiet, the air too still. Axel, walking a few paces ahead, suddenly stopped, his head turning sharply to the left. He growled softly, low in his throat, an almost imperceptible sound, but it was enough to make John's heart skip a beat. "Hold," John whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind. He crouched low, signaling to the rest of his team. The soldiers behind him mirrored his actions, drawing closer to cover. It was routine now, moving in quiet, calculated steps, relying on Axel to guide them through the danger zone. The dog had a way of reading the environment like no human could. His senses honed by training, but also by the kind of lived experience that only comes from surviving in a place like this. John watched Axel carefully. The dog was still, his posture tense but controlled. The air seemed to hum with anticipation, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Axel's eyes narrowed, his body coiled like a spring, ready to react. Nothing. Yet, John muttered to himself. He could feel it too, the gnawing suspicion that something wasn't right. They hadn't seen any movement, hadn't heard any voices, but the hairs on the back of his neck were standing at attention. Axel's growl deepened, a low rumble that sent a shiver down John's spine. There was a sudden flash of motion, barely perceptible, a shadow darting between two mud-brick buildings in the distance. Contact left. John barked, instinct taking over. The team snapped into action. The soldiers moved with practiced precision, their rifles raised and ready, their eyes scanning the village for any signs of movement. But it was Axel's sudden dart forward that gave them the first real clue. The dog's sharp bark echoed across the valley, and in that instant, gunfire rang out from the shadows. "Down!" John shouted, pulling Axel to the ground as bullets ricocheted off the rocks nearby. The firefight was swift, the exchange of gunfire nothing more than a blur of adrenaline and instinct. John's mind moved in overdrive, assessing, reacting, giving commands to his team. But through it all, his focus never strayed from Axel. The dog was beside him, alert and unflinching, its body a perfect counterpoint to John's own tension. Axel moved with precision, dodging bullets and staying low to the ground, his nose working, as he sniffed the air for any hint of danger. Every movement was a dance calm, calculated and fluid. John was amazed at how seamlessly the dog and his team worked together. As if they were one unit, one mind, the firefight ended almost as quickly as it began. The enemy forces hidden in the shadows of the village had retreated, their gunfire fading into the distance. The air was thick with dust, and the silence that followed felt suffocating. John let out a slow breath, his heart still pounding in his chest. He looked over at Axel, whose body was still tense, his head held high, scanning the surroundings for any further threats. "You good, Axel?" John whispered, his voice barely audible. The dog gave a quick, sharp look in his direction, then turned to continue scanning the horizon. In Axel's eyes there was no fear, no panic, only calm, unwavering focus. John had seen that look in his own men's eyes before, but there was something different about it coming from a dog. It was the kind of focus born from experience, from survival. "Yeah, I'm good too," John said softly, allowing himself a brief moment of quiet. He wasn't sure why, but the weight of the moment, of what they had just experienced together, settled in his chest. There was a bond forming between them, one that was starting to feel unspoken but incredibly strong. That night, as the team set up camp in a makeshift outpost on the outskirts of the village, John sat near the fire watching Axel. The dog lay on the ground next to him, its back to the flames, eyes scanning the darkened valley for any sign of movement. The fire crackled softly, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain, but there was a peace in the air now that the day's dangers had passed. John stretched his legs out in front of him, his thoughts drifting. The day's events had been chaotic, but with Axel by his side, he felt strangely grounded. It was like the dog had a way of taking the chaos of the world and turning it into something manageable, something he could face. It wasn't just the dog's skill or training that made him a valuable partner. It was the sense of calm Axel brought with him. When the world was spinning out of control, the dog was the anchor. I didn't think I'd ever get used to having a dog on patrol with me," John said quietly, more to himself than to Axel. The dog's ears perked up slightly, and its eyes flicked to him as if acknowledging the statement. John smiled softly, feeling a strange, unspoken connection in the way Axel responded. "But here you are," he continued, almost laughing at himself. "Guess I was wrong." Axel's tail gave a small, almost imperceptible wag. It wasn't much, but it was enough as the fire burned low and the darkness of the desert closed in around them. John closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the fire seep into his bones. His thoughts were clearer now, the constant noise of war and the weight of his responsibilities feeling a little less heavy. In the silence of the night, with Axel lying beside him, John realized that this wasn't just about survival anymore. This wasn't just about making it through another day. It was about the unspoken trust that had begun to form between them, something deeper than he had ever expected from an animal. And in that trust, he found strength that came from the quiet companionship of a dog who had seen the horrors of war, just like he had. A dog who was more than just a soldier. Axel was, in that moment, John's partner, his brother in arms, and perhaps in some quiet, unspoken way, his salvation. The weeks that followed their close call in the village brought a shift in the air, one that wasn't easily ignored. John could feel it in the way the soldiers walked a little more cautiously, their eyes a little more alert, as if the war itself had begun to whisper of something more ominous on the horizon. The mission reports had grown more urgent, the intelligence more fragmented. Everything was building toward something, and John could sense it. It was the kind of feeling that gnawed at the pit of your stomach, the kind that only comes when you know the calm before the storm is about to break. Axel, as always, remained his rock. Through the crackle of radio transmissions, the sound of boots on gravel, and the constant dust in the air, the dog was the one constant John could rely on. They had fallen into a rhythm, John and Axel, together in the field, partners in every sense of the word. Axel's sharp instincts kept them out of more dangerous situations than John could count, and his silent companionship gave John a comfort that he hadn't realized he needed. But that sense of calm would soon be tested. Perhaps more than either of them could have anticipated. The mission came in late one evening. Intelligence had reported an insurgent stronghold in the mountains just north of their base, a place where weapons were being stockpiled, ready to be used against U.S. forces. It wasn't just a reconnaissance mission anymore, it was an operation. A full-scale raid. John and his team were tasked with clearing the area and neutralizing the threat. John sat in the dim light of the briefing room, his eyes scanning the mission map laid out before him. The mountains were treacherous, the terrain unforgiving. It wasn't the kind of place you could just waltz into and expect to leave unscathed. It was exactly the kind of mission John had spent most of his career avoiding. "Lieutenant," one of the commanders said, pulling him out of his thoughts. "You're going to need Axel on this one." John looked over at Axel, who was lying on the floor beside him, panting softly, his dark eyes alert. The dog had grown accustomed to these late-night briefings, always by John's side, always waiting for the next order, the next challenge. "We'll need the extra help," the commander continued. "This is a high-risk mission, and we need all the support we can get. I'm putting you and Axel in charge of clearing the western perimeter." John nodded, understanding the weight of the words. Clearing the perimeter was no small task. It meant going in first, securing the outer boundaries, before the rest of the team could push deeper into enemy territory. It was dangerous, reckless even, but it was what needed to be done. The night before the mission, John couldn't sleep. His mind was too active, replaying every possible scenario, every contingency. But it wasn't just the mission that kept him awake. It was the realization that something had shifted between him and Axel. They weren't just two soldiers now, paired by circumstance. They had become something else, something stronger, something deeper. John found himself staring at the ceiling of the tent, listening to the sounds of his team preparing outside, the dull hum of equipment being packed. Axel lay beside him, his body curled up into a ball, but his eyes never fully closed. The dog was always watching, always alert. It was in his nature. "You ready for this, Axel?" John asked quietly, though he already knew the answer. Axel's ears perked up, and the dog's tail gave a soft swish against the ground. It wasn't a response, but it was enough. There was no need for words between them anymore. They had learned to communicate in silence, in the small gestures, in the way Axel's eyes met his when they were about to face another battle together. But even then, there was an absence. No more Axel by his side, no more quiet understanding in those golden eyes, no more weight at his feet as he moved, no more reassurance that, whatever happened, he wouldn't face it alone. John's focus had always been his team, his mission. He had never been the kind of man to dwell on things he couldn't change. But in the silence that followed the battle, with the sky finally clearing above and the echoes of gunfire dying down, the absence of Axel was deafening. It wasn't until they had cleared the stronghold and were finally on their way back to base that John allowed himself to mourn. It was then, when the physical threat of the mission was over, that the emotional toll hit him with the force of a freight train. That night, sitting alone in his tent, John let the grief wash over him in waves. The tears came hot and heavy, but he didn't fight them. Axel was gone. His partner, his companion, gone in an instant. And John, for the first time in a long while, allowed himself to feel that crushing weight of loss. He reached for the small collar Axel had worn, the one with the tag that had once jingled softly with every step the dog took. He held it in his hand, turning it over, his thumb tracing the small engraved letters. Axel. God, John whispered hoarsely, I miss you. He sat there in the darkness, the weight of the silence pressing down on him, and for the first time in years, John felt truly alone. The following days passed in a blur. The mission had been successful, but it felt hollow. The team had completed their objectives, neutralized the enemy, and cleared out the stronghold, but John couldn't bring himself to care about the victory. Not when Axel wasn't there too. Share it with him. There was no comfort in the accolades. There was no solace in the fact that they had won. What was a victory when the one thing that had made it bearable was no longer there? What was the point of surviving if you couldn't share it with the one who had kept you going, the one who had saved your life more times than you could count? In the days after Axel's death, John found himself caught in a whirlwind of memories of every moment they had shared. The quiet times in the field, the way Axel had always known when something was wrong. When the enemy was near, the way the dog had never hesitated to protect him. Those were the moments he clung to now, the only things that made the silence bearable. Axel had given his life for his team, for John, and as he sat in the darkness, the weight of that sacrifice pressed down on him like a burden, a reminder that sometimes even the strongest bonds were broken in the blink of an eye, and in that brokenness, John found his purpose, his reason to keep going. Because Axel had fought with him side by side until the very end. And for that, he would never forget him, even if it meant carrying the weight of that empty echo forever. As we come to the end of this journey, remember that the bond between a soldier and their loyal companion is something that transcends time, distance, and even death. It is a bond that defines bravery, loyalty, and the quiet power of love. Tonight, we honor those who've given everything for us, our heroes, both human and canine. Now it's your chance to give back. Every bid you make tonight helps provide support, training, and care for the dogs who continue to serve on the front lines, protecting those who protect us. Let's make sure their legacy lives on. Place your bid, make a difference. Because some bonds are too strong to ever be broken.